Hello, everybody. I love how the first Michelle King, kind of gave herself a superhero name. So I figured, being Michelle, I need to honor that. So I'm going to be big picture Michelle, okay, for the next 18 or so minutes. So I'm going to start with a story. Soon after the fall of the Berlin Wall, I found myself in a train station in East Germany. See, I'm old enough to know East Germany. And I was waiting in a terribly long line, right? People were taking 3 hours to get to the ticket window, and I know I was feeling incredibly impatient and not open to meeting people. But even so, a man came up to me, and he said, "I'm from Romania. Are you American?" And of course, I was immediately suspicious, right? But I said yes. And then he said to me, "There is great distance between your country and mine. About 200 years. And then he laughed, and he hugged me. And you know that part of the Grinch Who Stole Christmas, right, where they say his heart grew 3 sizes that day? And in that moment, I felt like my consciousness grew 3 sizes. Because suddenly I realized that the 3 hours I would wait to get a train ticket was nothing compared to the years, if not decades, he had waited to travel from his country to another. Shifting your perspective is an incredibly powerful tool. Not only does it change how we see things out there, but it changes how we see ourselves and where we're from in a way that humbles us, empowers us, and connects us. In 1992, I moved to Pittsburgh as a journalist covering the redevelopment of the city. A few years later, I started PUMP, Pittsburgh Urban Magnet Project, to keep young people in the region. And then I left the region, so sorry. But, it was good. It was a good reason, right? So I went to New York to work for the UN. And over the next 15 years, I got to travel the world, helping people make their communities and their countries better. And then that journey came full circle 6 months ago when I returned to Pittsburgh. So over the next 15 minutes, I'm going to share with you some stories from my travels and 5 universal lessons I learned along the way. And then we'll apply those lessons to here to see how we can make Pittsburgh the next global city. That was my first slide there, sorry that. So the first lesson is broaden your viewpoint, right? Broaden your perspective. So let me give you a big perspective idea. Today, in our interconnected world, I see a new type of global city emerging. The traditional global city is a center, right, of trade and finance, like a New York or a Tokyo. But the next wave of global cities will reflect the changing way we produce value by shifting from centralized to decentralized, by empowering others rather than following a single leader, and by not asking, will I succeed, but will I matter? Our city and region can shine in this new space. We have a 200-year history of innovation, entrepreneurship, and international influences. We're a city of the birthplace of 4 industries and have made enormous contributions in the areas of health, technology, communications, and transportation, right? We're a city of firsts. We had the first oil refinery, the first radio station, the first movie theater, and you all know so many more of these. We were a city that developed the long-distance transmission of electricity so we could enlighten the country. And we also invented the ice capades, which I loved as a kid. And because Pittsburghers love to eat and drink, we also invented, or not invented, but we made whiskey and invented the Big Mac, the Klondike bar, and the banana split. So we've been making stuff, right? The point is we've been making stuff for a really long time. So from that broadened perspective, I suggest that the decline of the steel industry, which has hung over the city, right, like a shadow for decades, was not the breakdown of a once great city, but rather the anomaly in the city's history, and maybe even a necessary anomaly that compelled our reinvention to bring us back out in front. And that's where I think we are today. We're a city on the cusp of returning to our roots. Think about it. It's a great opportunity, right? But at the same time, I've seen many great opportunities and good ideas all over the world go unrealized because it's easier to think big ideas than it is to actually make them happen. So let me give you a little example of that, right? I went to a meeting in Afghanistan where a US embassy staffer was explaining to Afghan craftspeople, tailors and shoemakers, how they could become part of a new program. And she was explaining that after years of importing all their goods, they were now going to create this program so they could buy from local vendors. And it was going to be very easy to be certified for this program. They just had to enter some data on an Excel spreadsheet on a computer, and then, the embassy would get back to them. These are the guys that she was talking to that day. You can see some of the confusion, right? And so I turned to my Afghan colleague who speaks both English and Dari, and I said, how does the translator translate Excel spreadsheet, right, to these guys who probably don't use computers a lot? And he goes, oh yeah. He goes, it translates like that big thing on the bed, like the duvet, like the bed sheet. And then he went back to listen to the talk. So, buying local is a good idea. But the implementation of that idea went south somewhere terrible, right? Because these guys are really good at their craft, but they're probably not really good at an Excel spreadsheet. And not surprisingly, for this and other reasons, that program wasn't really successful, right? So this brings us to lesson 2, which is meet people where they are, right? Meet people where they are. So how does this translate to Pittsburgh, right? Meet people where they are. Oh, I just lost my thought. To make change in the world, here, or I would say even in ourselves, we need to get out of our heads and use our social and emotional skills, right? Big data is great. Big wisdom is better. Often the reasons that good ideas or a place doesn't move forward is that big, hairy, squishy stuff that doesn't fit in an Excel spreadsheet, right, or a database. It's stuff like ego and fear and discrimination. To make Pittsburgh a truly global city, we too need to look at our challenges and our shortcomings, and some of which are very definable, right? We could use more capital for investment. We could use a broader talent pool in certain areas. But the hard stuff is our own big, hairy, squishy stuff, right, that we often turn away from, that we don't like to look at. And, in our city, part of that is a growing inequity between different groups, a pronounced lack of diversity, and I would even argue in some areas a sense of inferiority, right? So this is the part of my talk where I find I lose the most people, because it's really about implementing big ideas. And everybody gets more calm then, because when you're talking about what's possible, it's really exciting, right? We could be a global city, or I could do this. And suddenly you realize what it might take to do that, to get from here to there. Like, how do we get Pittsburgh to be a global city? How do I confront fear? And people switch off, and they feel like, oh, it's too overwhelming. So I'm here to tell you, don't do that, right? It does feel overwhelming. But it's often because we try to do these things by ourselves. We try to figure it out. So what I say to you is when you have a vision of an idea, bring people around the idea, especially people who don't think like you, who might have a different type of input. And even more important is don't think you need to know the answer before you take action. And this took me like half my life to learn this one, because especially as Americans, right? Most of you probably grew up somewhat like I did, where you're told like you need to know what you're doing, like what's your job going to be and what's your plan, right? And so you feel like if I don't have a full plan, I can't do anything, and it's totally incorrect. Because when I look back on the times in my life where I was part of something that truly made a difference, right? That had a big impact, I never knew I was doing that at the time. I'm stupefied, to be honest with you, that Pump, which started with 3 people talking around a wine bottle, is now almost 20 years old and has 6,000 members and provides programming to 25,000 people. Like, we never saw that coming. We never thought of that. So, put your idea out there. So here's another story. I was very recently working with the UN team in Liberia around their post-Ebola assessment, right? Like really exciting, sexy stuff. But it is interesting, okay? And we were looking at what works and what doesn't work and what can the country learn from this crisis to be more resilient going forward. And while this was a very unique and unusual situation, what we found is the shortcomings we identified were frighteningly familiar. For example, citizens didn't trust authority because of past abuses and corruption, a government that was in denial of the threat that was around them, and well-meaning outside efforts that didn't connect with local leaders who truly understood what was happening at the community level. The tide turned in Liberia from bad to better when the community activated itself. The limited resources that were coming into the country around training and information, the community self-mobilized with these tools and found ways to protect themselves. For example, they activated tailors in their communities to stitch together plastic sheeting to make makeshift protective gear. They started writing down who came and went from their houses, so if somebody in that house later became sick, they would know who may have also come in contact with them. And they made simple but effective water and sanitation systems at a very local level. And so the lesson from this, because initially there was a lot of fear and a sense of what people were doing wrong, right? You probably heard about this in the newspaper. When that was shifted to how can we work together, suddenly we found local solutions. And this brings me to our lesson number 3, right? Which is engage people to co-create their own solutions. You don't have to do it yourself. In fact, I would tell you don't. You shouldn't, because you're going to be missing a perspective that for some reason you don't have. So how does that lesson, engaging people, translate to Pittsburgh? Well, right now, our city and county government are very open, right, to creating new ways of doing things and a new framework for how we move forward. And this is valuable and creates an environment for possibility. But I will also say that top-down planning needs a bottom-up counterweight that brings in the intelligence of the community and the people and builds trust. So that going forward, it's a team effort of big picture thinking and local knowledge. Just like the Liberians saved lives when they leveraged those outside resources with grassroots ingenuity. Another thing I learned in my travels, it's always funny to get a self-reflection of like your own country, right? is that Americans love to fix things. We're problem solvers, and we're good at it. And so this is a lens through which we see the world, right? What's broken? How do I fix it? And this spurs a lot of creativity. But at the same time, we often miss the flip side, which is what already works, and how can I activate it and build on it? So over 10 years ago, when I was working in Burma, the country was on the brink of an AIDS crisis, and the government did not want to admit this because they felt it would be a stigma on their nation. So that meant there was no information and no services out there for the people. And we needed to work through the government because who else would be able to reach a population of 53 million people? So we kept trying. We initially, tried to be the friendly partner and say, well, we really need to work together, and that did not work. And so then we tried to scare them with what was really going on. And then we just, we tried logic. We started throwing statistical information at them about how diseases vector, and suddenly they become exponentially more difficult to contain. And it fell on deaf ears for the most part. And every month that went by, more people showed up in our clinics with signs and symptoms of the virus. So Burma is a devoutly Buddhist country where monks are revered and are seen to carry the spiritual well-being of the people. So a colleague said to me one day, what if we give the monks the AIDS information and ask them to share it with their people? And thereby using a communication system that connects thousands of temples across the country, even into the most remote areas. So we did this, and it worked. It worked because we stopped trying to fix what we thought was broken, and instead used an already existing indigenous, very effective communication system that had probably been around for well over 100 years. But we almost missed it because it didn't look like what we thought it would. Which brings me to the next lesson, which is build on what works. So, what works in Pittsburgh? What's our greatest strength? Wow, quiet. Okay, people, right? People. And we have a core resource that is clean and inexhaustible: innovation. So to be global, Pittsburgh doesn't need to be the biggest or the wealthiest city, but the city most adaptive to change. Because that is both our old and new competency. And we're good at it. So here's a picture of some of our people. So let me share with you one idea, right, of how to take some of the problems and challenges of our city forward, building on this asset of people. Pittsburgh has an asset that other cities don't, right? We have a ferociously loyal diaspora of tens of thousands of people that are around the world, right, that used to live here. I've met them everywhere. I'm sure you have too, right? My Uruguayan hairdresser's wife in New York City, a Pittsburgher, a particle physicist I met on a hike in Switzerland who lives in Geneva, formerly from Highland Park. Serious. I worked with a World Bank economist for a year in Kenya, but it wasn't until the day that he put French fries on his sandwich that I thought to ask him, right? Like, hey, where are you from? Ben Avon, just outside the city. So I want to be clear that while there's lots of people out there that are thinking around innovation and that we have great resources, that creativity and innovation is not the purview of just a few people, right? Anybody can be part of the innovation economy. Use your own experiences and what you know to come up with local solutions to big challenges. For example, how do we help elderly people in our community age in place? How do we help working parents with issues around child care? And I bet a lot of the people here and there have some of the same ideas and challenges. So the idea that I'm putting out there to maybe solve some of these problems is that we have an enormous untapped resource in our diaspora of people who care about the city. And at the same time, especially right now, the whole city here is interested in making the next Pittsburgh. So what if you could connect these two? So let me just very quickly show you a map that Google made. This is all of the Steeler bars across the globe. And I happen to know at least one of them is missing in Australia, just because I've been there. So if this is the Steeler bars, how many people with a relationship to Pittsburgh do you think there are around the world? Which brings me to which brings me to an idea. Sorry, I seem to be missing a slide. Well, I am missing a slide. So I'm going to tell you about the slide that's not there. There would be a fifth slide here, which is our fifth lesson, which is called Activate the Tribe, right? So activate these people and our people. So consider this. What if we developed an initiative where we connected people in Western Pennsylvania with those who left? It would be a bridge between here and there, between the past and the future. And we would call it Pittsburgh Homecoming. And the purpose would be to show people who left the region that this is not the city that they left, right? This is a different city today. And we would create ways where people here and there could continually share ideas, build partnerships, invest in businesses, and project an up-to-date image of what the region has to offer, right? Something that's not the old, steel, smoky city. And at the same time, we could tap into the experience of the Pittsburghers out there and offer them a way to bring their knowledge and expertise back home. We could have a week of events in the city where people came and actually experienced that this is still a city of deep innovation and a place that makes change. So what I've explained today, or at least from my point of view, is that I think Pittsburgh's on the cusp of great opportunity. But it would be really easy to miss it if we don't see the big picture and we don't take steps to make that change happen. And then we discussed 5 lessons, kind of universal lessons, right, that are really guideposts to the type of actions that we can take locally. Things like just have a bigger point of view, find ways to bring more people into the city, attract ways of engaging more people that are already here, build on our tradition of ingenuity, and unite Pittsburghs near and far, right? So my talk today is not about what might be. It's really about what's already happening. But when you're in it, right, it's hard to see. So I hope I've expanded your view a little bit today. And I encourage you and challenge you to join me in evolving Pittsburgh into being the next global city, a place where innovation happens again and again. Namaste.